I came in this world on November 29, 1955. My parents lived in a small town in South Florida. My mother entered the hospital with complications at 23 weeks. My dad took her to the hospital. He waited for the doctor. The doctor came down in his pajamas. He examined her and listened for a heartbeat, but he didn't hear one. So he looked at my parents and he said, "I do not hear a heartbeat. We're going to have to abort." The doctor induced the abortion. He packed her uterus with gauze and salt and he gave her a shot. And then he went home. He left her under the care of a nurse. When I came in the world at 3:25 a.m., my mother said I was making a squeaking noise, and she asked the nurse, because she was very disturbed by the noise, she asked the nurse, if the baby is stillborn, why is it making a squeaking noise? The nurse, and I guess trying to comfort my mother, told her, "Honey, don't worry about it, all miscarriages do that." Under the doctor's orders, she wrapped me in a face towel and she placed me on the back porch of the hospital. Now keep in mind that this hospital, what I call a hospital, is not the hospital we have today. It was converted a two-story house with a back porch. I was placed back there in a basket and left there and basically discarded. I remained there until the following day. My grandmother and my aunt came down to visit my mother, and I guess out of curiosity, she went to look at me and she unwrapped me and she realized I was alive. Of course, at that point, she went into orbit and got very upset. She contacted the local police. They came down, and because at that time, the town I was from did not have an ambulance that was either available or didn't have an ambulance. I'm not even real sure about that. They had to get approval from, I guess, either the police department or the local mayor to transport me to another hospital. And the only thing they could come up with was the nurse's Cadillac, which weighed as much as an ambulance. So they approved that. And when they got to around Bartow, Florida, the police escort had a wreck. They had to wait for another police escort to take over. I finally did make it to Lakeland Regional, and I was placed under the local doctor there. And the Women's Club raised money for an isolette, and I was placed in an isolette. Now, at that time in 1955, they had just learned that oxygen dried out a baby's eyes, and it made them go blind. So they had learned that the year before. So they were able to adjust the oxygen in the isolette. I remained there for about 3.5 months. Now, the oxygen did make my hair turn red, and copper red, in fact, and that's how I got the name Penny. During the 3.5 months was not an easy time. My life was in danger in more ways than one. Not only did I have pneumonia, I was having to be intubated, but my dad tried to remove me several times, and they had to get a restraining order against him to actually keep him from removing me because he did not believe he could afford me. They were charging him like $40 a day, and he at that time was an insurance salesman. He made like $125 a week. He desperately did not want me to live. I think the fear of the finances, the fear of me being not normal would have just ate at him. So he had a meeting with the chief of staff, and the chief of staff said, "Mr. Browder, just what do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, you're doing all these studies on her, and you're writing up articles in the American Medical Journal, and you're doing all this, and I'm getting the bill, and I just can't afford it." So they made arrangements for him to pay me off. He called me in his office when I was in 7th grade, and he told me, "Honey, I just got you paid off." I stayed there for 3.5 months. I came home on March 12th, 1956, was actually the day I was due. And that was the first time my mother had ever held me. After I came home from the hospital, I continued to have problems, and I would still choke. So my mother she actually changed doctors and went to another doctor, and he said that I had to have my tonsils removed. So they went in 6 months, they removed my tonsils, and I always wondered why my voice was so hoarse. But about 2 years ago, I went to an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and I found out that my left vocal cord is actually paralyzed. and that is why my voice is so raspy, and because I had to be intubated at such a young age. A couple of years ago, my dad and I were on our way to the VA. I was taking the doctor, and I thought, now it's a good time. I had gotten a little curious. I'd heard my story all my life, but there was just answers I wanted. So I asked my dad, I said, Daddy, tell me why I was aborted. And he said, honey, why are you asking me this? And I said, I'm driving down the road, and I said, because I have a right to know, Daddy. He goes, well, he said, there was an abortion between you and your brother. And I thought I was going to drive off the road. I went, do what? And he said, there was an abortion between you and your brother. And I said, are you serious? He goes, yes. And I said, why did you do it, Daddy? He said, because I couldn't afford it. I said, how did you do it? He said, with a clothes hanger. And then everything sort of like cleared up. Then I understood why my parents had marriage problems. I understood why my mom and dad divorced at 15, because she literally had developed dislike, and I don't think she ever forgave him. I think it created a lot of marriage problems through the years. I understood now why they fought behind closed doors. I do believe that I was probably a failed home abortion, and that is why she had complications at 23 weeks. It explained why he desperately did not want me to live. It explained why he tried to remove me from Lakeland Regional. He just basically couldn't stand the thought I was alive. My dad did come to the Lord later on in his years. He won a lot of people to the Lord. And at the end, on his deathbed, he looked at me, and I was with him when he died, and we were alone. And he looked at me and he said, honey, I don't know what I'd done without you. Millions and millions of babies have been aborted in our nation alone. Just 76,000 last year in Florida. It breaks my heart, and it's a shame that the destinies of these babies were decided by someone else. We don't know if those babies could have been the president or could have had the cure for cancer. We don't know what their destinies could be, but they had the right to live. They had the right to love, and they had the right to pursue happiness. I am so grateful that I'm able to share my story, and that I lived through a botched abortion, that I don't have medical problems, and that I was able to marry my high school sweetheart. I have 2 children and 7 grandchildren, and I know they're glad I lived. And when we get together at Christmas and we get together at Thanksgiving, it just brings it home, so to speak, that what a miracle my life was. And I feel compelled by God to share my story. I feel compelled to stand up for the unborn, to stand up for those who can't speak for themselves. And I had the great privilege of meeting with Governor Scott and see the botched abortion bill signed into law, which spoke for all the unborn babies or all the babies who were of a botched abortion, that they have the right to medical treatment. And in fact, I found out that the HB 1129, which was the number of the bill, is actually my birthday. So I believe that we all as human beings have a destiny, and it's up to us to find our destiny in God. I believe this is part of my destiny.